I'd like to now introduce Chris Lennon, who's the CEO of MediAnswers, and he's the chairperson of the CIMM drafting group that is working on this open binding of IDs. So Chris will give us an update on the CIMM RFP.
So let me make sure I just understand the position I'm in here, Jane. So we're running late, and I'm the one thing standing between a room full of people here and their break. Okay. All right. So thanks, Jane. Going to talk about kind of the theme of the day of what we've been talking about here is trying to get out of the mess that we're in right now with cross-platform measurement. So what I'm going to talk about is what does that show or add, or a new way of being able to facilitate cross-platform measurement and be able to tell what really is being watched and how is it being consumed on the various platforms out there. So we'll talk about the identification, just about how is what we're talking about with this whole open ID approach very different from what we're used to in the business right now, what's happened so far, and kind of where are we going with this. So basically the fundamental issue, well, it isn't one issue. It's, what was seen, when was it seen, on what device was it seen, what media outlet sent that out there, and are you really sure that's what happened? So there's a whole set of issues that we need to address here when we're talking about cross-platform measurement. So the basic idea behind the Open ID initiative is that we've got an ad ID, or in the case of program content, an IDR, that's embedded in with the commercial or the program itself. And how can you tell this is a guy who's watching here? Can anybody relate to this is the way men actually watch television? Could we detect something this quick? Well, I don't know about that. We'll talk about that. Well, that's true. That's true. It's a retro guy, but the viewing habits I think are pretty accurate here. But the idea is you've got the identifier embedded in with the content, and so when the guy or gal is watching this, it can be detected via, in this case, the audio that's being sent out along with the pictures. And it's important to note that we've looked at the detection could be on a couple different levels. It could be within the viewing device itself, so whether that's a large screen, a tablet, a phone, could be within that, or it could also be acoustically just somewhere in the room. It could be that your phone is picking up that you're watching something on the big screen, or some other device is doing that. So that's kind of the basic idea behind OpenID. So how is that different from what we've always done in the media business here? Well, I think it's very different in a few different ways. The fact that we're actually embedding the identifier of the content that's being watched so that you can unequivocally say, at this moment in time on this device, this person is watching this ad or this piece of content, that's a little bit unique. The fact that we're doing this as an open standard, so no proprietary secret sauce allowed here, I think is fairly unique. And the fact that we're providing a tool here in terms of being able to tell what airs when and where. And how that ends up being used is entirely up to the industry. We're not dictating that. We're just dictating how this is going to be done. So it enables all kinds of interesting, I think, business models going forward. So where did this all come from? If you think back a few years, the CIMM Taxi effort did a lot of great background work on all this, identifying what the problem is here and how we might be able to approach a solution to it. Go back a year or so ago, we did form a study group within the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers to look at basically what's possible. Can we even solve this problem? Well, if we fast forward to today, we got past all that. The good news was, yes, we decided, yes, this could be solved, and there were a few ways that this might be approached. We're now at the point where we've got what's called a drafting group, and their task is to actually write the standard to do this. And it's well through its process of getting toward actually drafting a standard. So, but a few things we need to consider here. We can't just do this kind of work in a vacuum. A lot of things already exist out there right now. One of the decisions we made from the study group was that this should be done, and I think we can address most of, if not all of the use cases that we're concerned about here with audio watermarks. That wasn't an obvious thing going into this. There were several technologies that we looked at, but we really settled on audio watermarking as kind of the sweet spot for doing this. Well, that's terrific. That's something we're all fairly familiar with, so that's a good thing. However, there's some baggage that comes along with that because lots of people are already using audio watermarking. So we need to make sure if we do this, we don't step on or interfere with any of the other audio watermarks that are out there. Chief among some that you've got, Nielsen has obviously been doing this a long, long time. There are anti-piracy watermarks that are out there. There's some new effort within the ATSC for their 3.0 effort that will include a watermark. So, well, let's not make sure we don't invent something wonderful here that steps on the good work that a lot of other people are doing. So coexistence is incredibly important here. Few other requirements here we came up with saying, okay, we got to be able to put an ad ID in for the spots. We got to be able to put an IDER in for the program material. Early on, we said, boy, it might be nice if we could embed them both at the same time. What do you do if you've got embedded commercials within the program? What if you want to measure product placement, that sort of thing? Well, we talked about that as a nice to have initially, and we kind of filtered this down to something that, no, we think we can address this by either one or the other and not having them both embedded simultaneously. If you've been involved with watermarking in the past, there's a lot of compromise to be had there, both in terms of the amount of data you put in there and then how detectable it ends up being in the end. Has to be able to, whatever we do here, has to survive all common distribution platforms and all the processing that takes place getting to you, whether you're watching the content, again, phone, tablet, big screen, doesn't matter. Has to clearly be able to survive recording and playback. Not everybody's going to watch your content when you send it out to them. Has to be able to address the file download type of scenario. One big thing, and if I go back to the case of the slide earlier with the guy clicking through the channels constantly here, well, yeah, how quickly do we have to be able to detect this? Well, one of the requirements we said is we have to be able to detect a change of ID within a second. Now, we're not necessarily going to be able to tell what it is within a second, and we've said, well, for longer form content, within 5 seconds would be good. For short form content, within 3 seconds would be good. Those weren't arbitrary numbers. Those came out of a lot of work on determining kind of what the sweet spot is on all that. And then finally, and this may seem kind of surprising, we have to be able to support the replacement of an ID. Again, this is an open standard here, and why would you want to be able to do that? Well, one of the great examples that came up in the group was in the case of program content of a newscast or a sportscast, which reuses content from a variety of sources. You don't want it switching back and forth. If I'm watching SportsCenter and I'm seeing highlights from a dozen different baseball games, I don't want to see the IDER that's associated with those dozen different games. I want to be able to replace that with an IDER that points to SportsCenter. So that's just one case here. Have to be able to insert and detect these audio watermarks at a variety of points. We couldn't just have one point where, well, thou shalt insert the mark at this point, and you have to detect it here. Now, we need a lot more flexibility in there with that. Incredibly important, again, no matter what we do here, it's worthless if this becomes perceptible, if it destroys the viewing and listening experience of people. So it can't degrade the perceptible quality of either in any way. Talked a little bit earlier about linear and nonlinear, so both with traditional, somebody sitting down watching something that's either broadcast or streamed, obviously need to be able to support that, but also nonlinear, so somebody actually downloads a file, we want to be able to support that as well. And then finally, because we're talking about not just being able to make this work on your big screen at home, but being able to work on a fairly lightweight, small phone, which has very limited resources to be able to run apps that can do this sort of thing, is if an app is developed that needs to be able to decode what the ID is on a spot, we want to make sure that can be done in a fairly lightweight manner, so it's not going to degrade the performance of the phone, or else it'll never be used by anybody. All right, so that's a whole set of requirements that we've set out there, and the good news is that when we set that out there and provided it to a group of respondents, everybody didn't just say, "Oh my God, I can't do that." We actually have several people who say, "Yeah, I can do that, and I can help you with that." However, it's nice to be able to say, "Yeah, I can do that. I can support all that," but I like to say that we're going to trust, but we're going to verify here. So we've set a pretty large set of test cases that we're going to put people through the ringer a little bit on this and make sure that what you say you can do, you can actually do. So a couple of them that we're going to do initially is robustness and complexity tests, and there's a whole series of tests that people will have to prove that their technology can address our requirements using these tests. And then lastly, but certainly not of least importance, subjective tests to be able to actually make sure that this is not perceptible, that whatever technology is being used here is not degrading the viewing experience. So, like I said, these robustness and complexity tests, kind of interesting. They basically verify two things. They verify that the technologies that people provide to us here actually work and address the requirements that we have, but it also is a check of us on that the requirements that we've set for people are actually implementable. Yeah, we don't want to say, here's a set of 12 requirements and nobody can address all these, even though they say they can. The other thing that's really interesting about this is these tests, we're going to make the respondents administer these themselves. We're going to give them a 4 to 6 week period. I think it actually leans more towards 6 weeks. We'll give them all the content. We'll give them all the test scripts and say, okay, prove to us that your technology works in this area. And then kind of the final test, when we talked about the subjective testing, we won't do that in a self-test kind of a scenario. We're going to take that more into a lab environment, have some of the kind of golden ear type of testers to make sure that these different technologies truly are undetectable to even good golden ear testers. So where are we with this whole thing? This is a perfect time to really talk about this. We issued the RFP back on April 3rd, so very, very recently. We're in the process right now of collecting responses, and it'll close in a couple weeks on May the 4th. We already have gotten indication from several respondents, 4 so far, that they will be responding, and actually just had an open Q&A session for them this week to answer any questions. The intent then is to get everybody together, come back to here in about a month, and review the submissions, have people, if they want to demo the technologies that they've come up with to us, that's great. We're happy to look at those. Allow us to kind of have a Q&A session for them, talk about maybe some of the pros and cons of the different approaches that are suggested. Then this whole self-testing, which is going to be this kind of trust but verify step, is going to take place across June through mid-July. So by that point, we'll know kind of how these different approaches work, whether they work, whether our requirements are reasonable or not, and then targeting this lab testing with these golden ears. Sounds like a James Bond movie, doesn't it? But do that in probably late July is what we're looking at. So, okay, that's all wonderful. What comes out of all this after we've looked at all the submissions and decided what looks good to us? The goal is then selection of a technology or technologies, there could be more than one, to standardize and step right into beginning standardization work immediately. We know that if we take a long time to do this, this work is going to be irrelevant. So we need to complete this as quickly as we can. And in that vein, we're already working on a companion document to this standard that we haven't even written yet. And why are we doing that? Well, we think time is of the essence. We want to attack this as quickly as we can. And basically, the purpose of a recommended practice is to say, how can that standard be used in the real world? Recommended ways to use it. And talking about Yeah, some of the weird corner cases that we have identified as a group of, well, how do you work with things like syndicated barter spots? Would that have an ad ID attached to it, or would it have an IDER attached to it? Trying to kind of give some guidance to those types of things. Promos, other kind of weird cases, network IDs. And then also talking about, yeah, okay, if we are reading this watermark, how do we do that? Is it done in a device? Is it done acoustically in the room? Yeah, how do you make all that work? So there's a few things that we're kind of focusing on there. And the fact that we're already working on this right now, I think is really encouraging and speaks to the fact that we're going to hopefully get this done as quickly as we possibly can. So the goal is to get all the testing done this summer. Authoring of a standard, well, it's going to depend on, do we have one technology to standardize here, or do we have multiple ones? We're hoping it's going to boil this down to one. It's hard to say what's going to emerge out of all of this testing. The recommended practice, we should have that largely complete this summer. And so the goal, and this is a goal we've had for a while here, is to have all this complete and standardized by the end of this year. That's what we're aiming toward, and we're moving as quickly as possible toward that. So hopefully I could stand up in front of you a year from now and report on, hey, we've got a standard, we got all this figured out. Now it's up to the industry just to implement that. That's it. I think I gained you back maybe 3 minutes, Jane. I don't know if that makes any difference, but happy to answer any questions, or if you're dying to get to the break, we can certainly do that too. So.
I'm curious to know, Chris, whether in the course of doing all this work, which I think is pretty cool, and obviously using ad ID and IDER, is it going to be possible for those two identifiers to, as George Ivey goes and creates standards, MRC standards that mitigate filtration of bot fraud, that ad ID and IDER could be in that chain and could help mitigate bot fraud?
Yeah, I think that's a potentially really cool part of this whole thing. And I'm probably not the expert to talk about that. I'll bet Mr. Geller would be would be happy to talk to you in the break about that in more detail. But the way I see this whole open ID thing is this enables not just cross-platform measurement, but a whole other set of really cool things that we could enable. You just think about, if we could tell what the content is that's airing on whatever device it's being consumed in, I think the possibilities are beyond what any of us can even think of right now of what that could enable. And I think bot fraud is just one of many of the cases that this could help to address. So yeah.
As well. Would it include audio as well?
Yeah, so this is
And
targeted.
are you testing for that?
Yeah, this is targeted obviously around audiovisual, ads and content and that sort of thing. But we really narrowed it down to the way to embed these ad IDs and IDERs into the content was in audio. While you could do that in video as well, we felt that by doing it in audio, it number one, simplified the whole thing for all of us, allows detection of it outside of the device, because we can hear things that come out of that device. And it seemed to address all the use cases that we could come up with in this case. It should be noted, this is kind of different from, if you're familiar with what the ATSC is doing in their watermarking area. They had a little bit different use case, and they're actually going in the direction of audio and video. We felt like we could address everything we needed to address with audio here.
That's it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. In radio. Okay. Our content has been our focus has been on TV content here. Honestly, we haven't talked a whole lot about radio content. This is audio watermark, so let your imagination go wild, I suppose. Be happy to talk to you about that a little bit more if you'd like. Yeah.
Chris, it's George Ivey with the MRC. I noticed on your earlier slide that you had a point that you didn't want to interfere with certain of the existing techniques, and you had Nielsen prominently listed on that technique. And I was curious if you could add a little bit, like, what do you mean by interfere? Because some people might be concerned that you might override or somehow alter their code. But one of the things that also concerns the business is how quickly these codes can be gathered and interpreted. And kind of the more data you stuff into the audio channel, the harder that becomes. So did you look at the timing of decoding, if you will, the ability to decode that adding your content in may cause as a kind of interference?
Yeah, that was really one of the critical things that it makes this as not as easy as we'd like it to be. You know, it'd be great if we were in our own little world and nobody else was putting audio watermarks in there, and we could just throw in what we want when we want and detect it whenever we want. That would have made this a whole lot simpler, but that's not the world we live in, obviously. And so it was identified early on as critically important that we not interfere with things like the Nielsen watermark, because that's obviously in widespread use right now. And you know, that's a requirement that we're putting on the respondents, that they prove to us that if they insert this watermark with the ad ID or the IDER in there, that it doesn't interfere at all with all these other watermarks that are in there, and enables, you know, because there's processes that are in place right now that are dependent on those watermarks, both Nielsen and in terms of content protection as well. So, you know, it certainly makes the bar higher for people here to be able to make all this all work, but that's an absolute requirement for us.
Thank you.
Question was very much the same as George's questions in terms of, are you certain and will there be enough testing to make sure that in no way this interferes with the existing PPM or television watermarks and codes that are there, and because there's so much dependent on that.
Yep.
Can interfere, but also who would insert it? Would our engineers have to insert another code? How would the codes get there? Because every time there's a change in coding, not only do our engineers need to make sure that you're not doing anything to the quality of our broadcast or telecast, but also are you interfering with their processing and the chain of things that have to happen as they get material out every day?
So to answer the first part of your question, anybody who submits technology for this will have to prove to our satisfaction that it does not interfere with any of those existing marks. So that's the first thing, and if they can't prove that, then they're not a candidate for standardization as far as we're concerned. And then in terms of being able to you know, insert this and detect this at a variety of points along the chain, that's really one of the requirements that we've got here is because we can see so many different use cases being enabled by this, we didn't feel comfortable saying that this has to be inserted at a particular point in the plant, that there may be, it may need to be inserted further upstream for certain cases, further downstream for other ones, and then the detection, you know, can really take place at any point. So we've left that fairly loose intentionally and have asked the respondents to show to us and prove to us that we can have some flexibility in at what point this is inserted and detected at. So we're kind of looking forward to seeing what the responses are and how flexible they are with that, while maintaining the sanctity of the other marks that are in there right now. So I think it's going to be real interesting to see the responses we get in the next 2 weeks. I wish I could give you an update a month from now, because I think our story will be even more compelling at that point.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that CIMM is made up of the engineers from all the media companies, and so they are aware of all of this, and they are, you know, it's very top of mind. So I've been spending a lot more time with all these engineers. It's kind of like an MRC group for engineers, and they're terrific, and they really pay a lot of attention, and they're very thorough in their testing. So I think we're in good hands. Anyway, I just want to give us time to have a break.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you know, we will. We're running 15 minutes late. I do apologize, but when a speaker isn't here at the start of the program, you can't start the program. So the whole day will just run 15 minutes late. So we're going to take a 25-minute break, come back here Actually, early, if you want to be here right at 3:45, we will start, and Charlene Weissler will be speaking with both Nielsen and ComScore on their progress in measuring unduplicated reach across platforms.